And we're hot. Hey guys, Peter Shankman, 20 minutes in lockdown for another day in New York City. I don't even know what day it is. It's some day on the week, I think, and it just stopped raining, and it's just going to continue on. And I just heard Dr. Fauci say he could see 100,000 new cases a day come August because hey, our freedoms, right? We don't get to wear masks. It's our freedoms. But you know what? For the next 20 minutes, we're going to forget all that. We're going to forget that we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're going to forget that the world is run by racists. We're going to go back in time. We're going to go back in time to the good old days. And we're going to do that with my good friend, Christopher Brogan. Chris, it is so good to see you.
Peter, it is so much better to go back in time than to think of 100,000 cases a day. So I'm good.
Amen. I mean, can you imagine if Marty and Doc had just gone 5 more years in the future? They'd be in the middle of this shit. But it is awesome to see you, and we're going to talk about the past and talk about some of the stuff that we grew up with. We're roughly the same age, and I remember probably 8 or 9 years ago seeing you in a Choose Your Own Adventure book that I saw in my parents' storage unit that for some reason they kept. But you and I are pretty much the same age, and we pretty much grew up on computers the same way, right? And we both sort of figured out a way to make a living doing that shit that we love, that our parents probably thought was crazy and that our friends thought was crazy. And, but I remember, what was the first computer you had?
My first computer that was actually mine and not a family device was the first Macintosh, 1984.
The SE. No, not just the original Macintosh.
The the first ever one that back then Guy Kawasaki was their chief evangelist wandering around in 1983 talking about how this thing is going to blow your mind. And to me, it did.
It was amazing. We had an Apple in the family. We had an Apple IIe was the first one, and then we got a 2GS. The 2GS was so much more powerful,
right?
And that was the first time I got a modem. I had a 300 baud modem, and I could dial up to bulletin boards. Were you on a bulletin board?
I was a BBS.
Did you run one, or did you run one? I feel like you ran one.
No, because I was just that lazy. Like I could almost make it work, and then I was like, it's too much. So I just dialed in. There were like 7 around my house around high school age.
I remember my parents got me a subscription to, I don't remember the magazine. It was a kids computer magazine. And it had to be like an Apple magazine. But all I remember was that you could send in your own programs that you designed, and they would print them. And then when you were reading it, you could copy it. And I sent in like a dozen. I never got anything published, but I'd always copy the ones that they put in the back of the magazine just to see if I could make it work. And I remember when I got to college, I got a Macintosh SE, and this will mess with the kids listening. It was state of the art at 1 megabyte of RAM that I upgraded to 4, and a 20 megabyte hard drive. And it was the shit.
Crazy.
It was the shit. Right? And I remember being a freshman at BU with that.
You just think about those numbers. I mean, this is when you feel old, is when you fling by Amazon and you look and see that 1 terabyte on a stick is like less than $100, and you remember what you paid.
We landed on the moon with about 1/10 of the power of this thing, and that just blows me away. It continues. We could land a 747 Heavy on Fifth Avenue with our phone today, and yet we use it to like get into fights with people whose minds were never going to change. That's what I love about it. But right. I remember, here's a bit of trivia. Do you remember that the naming composition for Macintosh was the SE? Any Mac they had that had a 68030 processor was designated with an X, right? And the only one that wasn't was the SE30, because someone in marketing said it's probably not a good idea to call the Mac the SEX.
Smart. I did not remember that little detail, but that's a smart detail.
When you were in school, were you like the computer geek? Were you like the guy who...
No, I was not. Sorry, I'm trying to set my phone to vibrate because I didn't realize it was not. No, I was not a computer geek. And I got to this from a strange place. Like I loved video games a lot. So when I was, when you talked about working out of a magazine, my buddy Mike Shedd and I would go over to his house. He had a Commodore 64, and we would type games, because that's how you could play a game, is type every single line of code, compile it and run it. Exactly that. And so we would do that. So I was always more like a computer culture guy. Do you know what I mean? Like I never wanted to code. I never could have cared about code. I'm not smart enough to code. My 14-and-a-half-year-old is an incredible coder, but me, I was a social geek. So I'm such an introvert. And when I got into bulletin board services in the old day, I always tell people it was like Twitter, except that everyone had to type what they were mad about and then hang up and wait. And so if I really hated it,
you come back 30 minutes later, someone will type something back to you. Exactly.
Wrath of Khan's a really good movie, you stupid donkey head. And then you'd hang up and then you'd have to wait for them to type back, no, it's not. It's really dumb. And you type back, no, you're dumb. And it would take forever. I mean, my joke was that, all kids are growing up so fast these days because they have access to internet porn. But man, oh man, ASCII porn back in the day, I would be like open and close parentheses for days. It could be a nipple, That's what I started with.
I remember, fast forward a few years, I remember downloading from, not the bulletin boards, from what were they called? The
like the news groups and stuff.
The news groups, right? You go alt dot whatever, and you download like 8 different files, and it would take all night. And you'd wake up in the morning, and the 7th one would have one corrupted bit of code, and the whole thing was useless.
Yeah,
I remember that like it was yesterday.
That, and then that was the big argument for Napster. It was like everyone's like, it's gonna ruin the world, and I was like, no. Do you know how many times I've been rickrolled on Napster? You know how many times I thought I was getting like a new Metallica live bootleg, and I really got like Boingo Boingo or something, which also would have been fine.
Some comedian said that kids today will never understand what it was like to have to go on Napster and give your computer AIDS just to get the latest Megadeth video or whatever it was, and it's so true.
Really true. I mean, you'd have to explain to your parents, I don't know how I got a virus, but it wasn't porn. It was music.
I remember, it's funny. And this is another bit of trivia that you probably didn't know. When I ran my PR firm, when I ran the Geek Factory back in '98, one of our first clients was Napster. I reached out to them and I said, hey, how can we help? We love what you're doing. They said, oh, we're getting our asses kicked in colleges because all the universities are threatening to eliminate access to us because we're using so much bandwidth.
Oh, man.
And so I started a campaign for them. We did a goodwill campaign where we donated bandwidth to the universities and made us friends with all the universities. And then, of course, a couple years later, everyone, they had to shut down. But yeah, I met Sean Fanning and the whole thing. It was amazing times back then, 98. This was wow. Now when you started, I read somewhere or you told me that your first mega client, when you went out on your own and decided to become the knowledge of all things social, your first mega client was, am I right when I say it was Sears?
No. So I did a project for Kmart, if that's what you're thinking about.
It might have been Kmart. But I remember you had one major client, like when you first started out, like you had some huge clients, and because basically you just went in and you knew that they didn't know anything, and you said, hey, I know slightly more than you, and we should do this.
It's more embarrassing and weird than that. And so here's what I did. I set up a website and I called it New Marketing Labs. I had a couple of business partners that were doing a totally other venture. And I made this kind of like my little project on the side of it. And I said, we serve Fortune 100 companies. Now, when I said that, I honestly didn't really get what I was saying. I was sort of saying, this is a hallmark of all of Chris Brogan's career, by the way. Every single part of it, I slip into a room and go, hey guys. And then we're like, you're in the wrong room. Oh, and then they don't make me leave. So I said, I serve Fortune 100 clients. I meant like they would be good to work with. And so, so Kmart was like a different beast. That was Ted Murphy from IZEA says, hey, want to do this cool sponsored project with Kmart? And I said, yeah, sure. And I went and I did he said, I'm going to give you like some money for shopping and you're going to shop and you're just going to report on the experience. And you just have to divulge how this went down. And I said, yeah, I'm in. So I wrote sponsored post. I got written up in every magazine at the time, like Ad Age, Ad Week, all those things. Like Chris Brogan's the devil. He sold his soul because he's blogging for money. Now everyone has sponsored posts. That's like how they exist as a company. But back then, what an ass. And all I did was I went to Kmart. I didn't say very nice things about it either. I was like, wow, this is a little weird. But what I also did was I said to my kids, why don't we do this? Why don't we buy toys it was around Christmas time. Why don't we buy toys for kids? Because there's all those Toys for Tots programs. They said, so let's buy all this stuff, but let's be aware that we're not taking any of it home. We're going to give it to kids. So I thought, that's a good way to make it sort of cause and whatever. So again, I was the devil. What an ass, blah, blah, blah. So I did that. My first big clients of my own, I just said, I work with Fortune 100. So they were Titleist. It was Scott's Miracle Grow and all that, Comcast, and in every single case, all of them, they were just like, yeah, we'd love to get some ideas. All it really was a lot of talking directly to big companies and kind of giving them a few steps in a direction and saying, maybe let's try this, or maybe this would be good. Or, Coke had me down and said, why don't we do this sort of thing? And then interspersed in there were real projects like Sony Summer of Dads with Sony Electronics USA. Right. Pepsi, I did a kind of a dad project with Bon and Bo when Bonham worked there. And I had a lot of opportunity to work those. But then suddenly, like, your logo slide that you got to use to brag to show people that they should hire you, mine was full of all the best names. And it was just because I was a stupid idiot. And then the first time I ever worked with the Fortune 500, it was because I didn't even know that was a barrier. And Maxine Clark, who ran Build-A-Bear, said, well, would you ever work with the Fortune 500? And I was like, oh, yeah. Like, I didn't even know what it meant, Peter.
No, I only take on the hundreds.
I didn't know. Like, I should have been trying to talk to, like, oil barons and stuff.
Well, it happens. I mean, I remember when I got my first job at a school was America Online. And I wound up helping to launch the newsroom at AOL. I was one of the first 3 founding editors of AOL News. And had not a clue. I got the job because I was hanging out in the Melrose Place TV gossip chat room on AOL.
Oh my gosh.
On AOL. And someone in that chat room said, my company's trying to build a newsroom. You have a journalism degree from Boston University. Send me your resume. I said, sure, I'll be great. I have no experience. This will be perfect. And 2 weeks later, was moving down to Virginia and being hired to work for AOL. And, that was the first time I ever learned, have faith and faith shall be given to you, or, fake it till you make it, right? I had no idea what I was doing. But I went in every day, and the 3 of us, none of us had any idea. This was
no.
Online news didn't exist. We made it, right? And we started with if it works, we'll do something, and if it works, we'll do it again. And if it doesn't work, we won't do it again. And that's how we built it. And we, back then it was still $2.95 an hour. Kids today who have no idea that it used to cost money per hour to be on the internet. And it was
right.
$2.95 an hour. And our goal was simple: keep our members online as long as possible. And so we would come up with stories. We'd tell stories. We'd make news packages. We'd make these ridiculous video packages that would take 6 hours for people to download because they were on modems. But it was an amazing experience. And I remember leaving AOL and thinking, okay, somehow you managed to bullshit your way into that. Let's see what's next. Right. And I think that it's funny. I think that you and I have talked about imposter syndrome in the past. And I think success breeds it. Right? Success continues to breed imposter syndrome because the more you do great things, when they end and you're like, what's the next thing? You're like, well, there's no way I could ever do something as good as that again. Right? And so you're constantly thinking about it. But it's literally, it's improv. It's constantly improv.
It is. And, a million years ago, so my parents, I give them credit for as many things as I could think to give them credit for. They were also voracious readers. There were so many books in my house. I learned my love of reading partly through them, partly through my gramps taking me around and buying me comic books. He was a candy salesman, so we'd get comics at every place he sold candy. Who has the coolest gramps in the world?
That's seriously, no one has that. That's amazing.
This is before that, like, an old man selling you candy seemed creepy. This was back in the old days where they would let, like, strangers get in the car with them. This
was still Charlie and Chocolate Factory candy, right? Like
neighbor kids always hanging out with my grandfather. So, he was a nice guy. So, reading. So my dad tells me about this book, Peter Principle, like when I'm like 12 or something. And talking to Peter Shankman, the Peter Principle is you will rise to the level of your
highest level of mediocrity
before you get incompetent or whatever. But that's all I have to know about that book.
No, is what happens after that. Each worker will rise to his or her highest level of incompetence, but then they won't be demoted and they won't be promoted. They will sit there and cause the backlog and the back jam. That's the Peter Principle. And it means so much because that's how shit goes wrong. Because now you have everyone in middle management who can't do fuck all.
When you can't do it, get promoted, right? So, and that's something, I think that in my case, absolutely through folly and mistakes, I am always at the front line again. I'm always at the front line. Some of our marketing and business colleagues, kind of pontificate about marketing, but they've given it up for Lent, But what I could say is that, hey, Ritesh, sorry. A lot of them gave it up for Lent, the idea that they have to market, but I think I will die trying to market. I was never a marketer. That's the other funny thing, right? Like, I was an idiot. I just like people. And so I'd wander around and go, if you told stuff in an interesting way, people would like it. And thank goodness the world invented content marketing, because that's the only one I know how to do. If it was interpretive dance market, if TikTok came first, I wouldn't be Chris Brogan.
So I just deleted TikTok because I'm really a little scared about what that app can do on my phone.
Yeah.
So I just deleted it.
And you're over 40. Good plan.
But it's interesting because I believe so often that you and I share the same brain. Like we literally I think one of our parents cheated on the other, either yours or mine, with each other, and we're probably related. We should never date. But I think that it's fascinating because our message, right? We've both done well with ourselves. We've made names for ourselves, right? For whatever that's worth. But our message has never been rocket science. Our message has simply been do good shit slightly better than everyone else. Tell a good story, right? And to this day, it is still mind-blowing how many companies don't get it. Do you remember I wrote that blog post, all social media experts need to go die in a fire? And I got a world of shit for it, right? But
tiny bit of anger came out. Yeah,
just a little bit. Yeah. But the premise was solid. I don't need a social media marketing expert. I need a marketing expert. I need someone who can tell a good story and compare that to everything. And Tyler Jurgensen, who's in Shankmine, says, "I'm glad that both of you agreed we shouldn't date." Yes.
There could be sparks, Tyler.
Hey, dude, I'm up for it. I'm up for it.
All I can think of is that Peter and I dated. We would never ever finish a sentence. Is the only problem. You don't even need a period around.
And we'd never see anyone else. We'd never go and have dinner with friends or whatever. It would just be you and I constantly. 3 years later,
we'd hear this sound somewhere on the earth. It's just like. It would
love it.
Make a sci-fi bad movie, I'm pretty sure.
Tell me, if you had to say in a nutshell or in one sentence, what have computers done for Chris Brogan? Right? I know it's a weird question, but I think you get what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. So this is, my, origin story was I tried really hard to get bitten by radioactive spiders. I was kind of afraid of spiders though. So it made it a little harder because I'd slap them before they bit me. And I also tried to be born from a different planet, but it turns out you can only be born the one time. And I was born in Maine, which feels like a different planet. But,
where in Maine, by the way?
I was born, my mom just got mad at me about this. Not mad. She asked me a question. She goes, "Do you remember where you were born?" I'm like, how does anyone not remember their stupid birthday? I was born in Waterville, Maine. Never lived there. I was visiting my Aunt Belle inside my mom. I didn't get a vote. I would have stayed home. But Augusta, Maine was where I was from. So my first place in the world was the capital city of Augusta, Maine, which is notorious for being the least interesting part of Maine to visit. It's all medical stuff and government stuff. Two things no one's anxious to go visit.
My parents had a house in Bar Harbor for several years during the summer.
Bar Harbor.
Yeah,
I saw my first bald eagle in the wild there. There's a really great Bar Harbor brewery. I got very drunk on blueberry beer with the beermeister because he brewmeister. He loved the idea that he'd made this cool blueberry beer. And nobody else seemed to want to taste it. I did. He kept refilling my glass. He's a brewmeister and I'm not. And by the end of this tour that he gave, he had his arm around me the whole time, refilling my drink. By the end of the tour he gave me, he whacked me on the back to say, "Hey, see you later, man." And I don't know, he knew it because he turned around and shut the door. I fell into the hedges right in front of Bar Harbor Brewery. And I came out the other side all covered up in scratches, but it was a really long walk back to my hotel. So that's
what have computers done? What has computers done for Chris Brogan?
Thank you, Peter. I was born and raised in Augusta, Maine, and when I first started getting into bulletin board services and that, there were only 3 discussions you could have in Augusta, Maine: Van Halen or Led Zeppelin, and the answer was Van Halen. Mustang or Camaro. I was a Camaro. And would the Red Sox ever win a World Series? And my answer was absolutely not. And I was proven wrong, but it still took them 86 years to do that. So I found bulletin board services so I could have the most important conversations, which is why Star Trek is ultimately better than Star Wars, even though it's more boring. It doesn't matter Superman versus Hulk. Those are two, otherworldly things, but is Batman really helpful or not? That's a good one. And that's what computers did, was it allowed me to connect with people and talk about interests and passions that weren't on TV. There were decades and decades of really bad attempts at superhero movies before nowadays, where we're all kind of like, oh, come on, another superhero movie. Yeah. No one thought we'd ever get here. No one thought, I was a Dungeons and Dragons player. No one thought we'd have so much Game of Thrones that we could complain about it. So what happens though is those fandoms, and you were talking about being a Melrose Place fan, the things that we want to be fans about. To me, there's so much vibrant energy there. And if I could find a way, and I've yet to isolate that little magic, if I can find a way just to chase fandoms and really do something helpful for some companies with it to make a bag of money, I would do that, because I think that there's such a vast distance between trying to convince someone to buy your toilet versus, oh, you love vampire movies? Me too. And I think that would be so much more fun.
Well, it's interesting because what you're talking about in a lot of ways is a loyalty to a brand, right? And even if that brand is just vampire movies or Star Trek or whatever. And I tell this story often. Guy you might know, the name of Meyer Burlow. Meyer was the global head of sales for America Online back in the 90s. He and Jan Brandt were basically responsible for the discs everywhere, right? And so Meyer, the one thing about Meyer, he was a smoker. And but this was the 90s. I was a smoker too, because smoking was healthy for you in the 90s. And
That's right.
We would go outside 2 or 3 times a day, right? And I would run into Meyer in the back having a cigarette. And so I learned more from this guy than almost anyone in the world. I learned how to dress. I learned style. I learned all from just watching him, right? And one day I was having a cigarette with him, and a car pulled up to the front of the building where we were. And they pulled up the AOL logo. There was a little Running Man logo. Remember that little triangle Running Man logo? And like 6 people got out of the car. And one of them came over to me and handed me a camera and said, "Can you take a picture of us in front of this logo?" Yeah, okay, sure. Whatever. 23, what the fuck did I know, right? I take the picture and they go, "Thank you." And they get back in their car and they drive away. And I go back to Meyer and I go, what the hell was that? Meyer goes, "Peter, that was brand loyalty." I go, "What's that?" And he goes, "I guarantee you, those 6 people met in one of our chat rooms and they took their 1 week off from the mill or the bar, wherever they work. Their 1 week a year they get off, and they piled into a car. They didn't go to Disney World. They came to the mothership because they wanted their picture." And I will never forget that. And I never saw that level of brand loyalty again until Peloton.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? Back when we used to go outside before the air would kill us, I would once a week when I didn't have my daughter, I'd go to those 5 a.m. or the 6 a.m. Live classes in the studio, right? They like me. They give me passes to go to the live studio. And I think it's awesome just to be with other human beings. Who knew? And I'll be out there at 5:45 waiting for the building to open, and there are 50 people who are there who have just come in New York. Like they landed at like 9 o'clock the previous night. They're not there to see Hamilton. They're not there to go visit the Empire State Building. They're there to go to the mothership and take a class with their favorite instructor, right?
Right.
And this was back in 2017 when Peloton was just starting out. And I remember saying, "Holy shit, I have not seen this since AOL. I need to invest in these guys." And a week after they went public, I started buying as much Peloton as I could. And then when everything went to shit outside, that turned into a really nice investment. But what they've been able to do with their brand, I run 3 Peloton groups on Facebook alone. I run an ADHD group, I run a single dads group, and I run a super early workout, like a 4 a.m. workout group, right? And these people, we are religious about posting our workouts, right? It combines the best of everything. Jeremiah Ouyang wrote a phenomenal thing about this. I forget what he calls it. He calls it, it's not a-hole. That's a different terminology, but something with like 5 different principles that basically state you get the dopamine, you get the brag rights, you get all this stuff, and that's the formula that Peloton uses. And that didn't exist before AOL. AOL created that, and then Peloton created that again. And so it's like lightning in a bottle when it does happen.
Jeremiah's like that for me, because one of the things that's absolutely true in some brand stories that really stick with us is if you have a strange or negative experience with a brand and then there's a correction. And I read some article that Jeremiah wrote with somebody else and I didn't like it. And I was kind of jerky about not liking it. My response was very much early days Chris Brogan, like, "I'm going to poop on you, and then I'm going to take the poop, and when it falls off you, I'm going to pick it up and put it back on you and push it back down you." And Jeremiah was so super ultra good. And he was like, "I would love to really learn from this. Tell me a little bit more what you're thinking." And I don't even know. First off, I was probably wrong, by the way. I said they were bad and their idea was stupid. And I was probably wrong. And Jeremiah still was like the nicest guy in the earth. Yep. And I have loved him ever since. And to me, those brand things that happen like that, where you start on the bad foot or you get an early bad foot experience, sometimes that's the most loyal you could be. Yeah. Is if someone fixes it in a way that keeps you there forever.
Well, when I wrote Zombie Loyalist, I did a little study on that, sort of an unofficial study, and that someone who buys from your brand is actually, I think it was 1.8 times more likely, if they have a problem and you fix the problem and go above and beyond, they're more likely not only to buy from you again, but to tell friends, right? And I have to caveat that with, I'm not saying you should deliberately screw up on a client just to get that.
Right.
But it's, we expect so little. All right. Last question. How is Chris Brogan? How is Chris Brogan mentally? How is Chris Brogan emotionally? How is Chris Brogan physically?
I got to tell you, the funniest thing about being a guy who deals with clinical depression and who has for years now, the minute this all landed, like the COVID stuff, the very beginning of March, I've just had I had a couple pretty not good years in a row, mentally and also financially because of the mentally. And I was feeling really like March 2nd, exactly. I was very optimistic, and I just picked up someone's canceled speaking gig. And I was like, this is it. This is the sign. And a dose. It's like
a dose. That's Jeremiah's thing.
So I say to myself, now things are looking up. And then the very next day, the world shut down, and I went, this is great. And for 100+ days, as people are starting to find new versions of depression, people are getting suicidal, all this awful stuff. The most depressed guy I know, I'm like, boop, 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 boop. Yep. So I'm great. And I can tell you why, but it doesn't make enough sense. And it's not worth it for anybody else who doesn't deal with depression. But it's like I was made for this 100+ days. Plus, I love being such an introvert that now I have a reason to be here. So it's great. It's great.
I've been telling people, I've been telling that
I can grow.
I've been saying that a lot. No, I've been saying that a lot. It's like being being here. I used to think how busy I was because a 3-day speech, a 45-minute speech took a day to get there, a day to give the speech, a day to come back. A 45-minute speech now takes about 46 minutes, right? Yes. And it leaves me with a lot of free time. Hi, daughter. Leaves me with a lot of free time. And so, I start thinking, what else can I do? And it's sort of a nice way to reinvent. Now, that being said, I don't want this to last forever. And if people wore a fucking mask, maybe I wouldn't. But, the premise of being able to reinvent, is something that you and I think have always been really, really good.
Yes. We learned it from Madonna,
right? Hear, without question. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well. I will be respectful of your time and cap it at 25 minutes, but you will come back. We will do this again because I just love talking to you. It's just so much. It's literally like talking to a mirror. It's so much fun.
We
even look alike.
Our hair grows in very similarly stupid ways.
When we cut it. It really, really does.
It's not.
I'm telling you. We have to do a 23andMe. I guarantee you we're related. Guys, Chris Brogan, 20 minutes of lockdown. On the shelf,
but I'm scared of it, so keep going.
I love this guy. Thank you, Chris. It is such a pleasure. Always.
Thanks,
always.
Peter.
All right. We'll talk again soon. Bye, everyone.